For many years since its discovery in January of 1820, the vast sheet of frozen terrain that is the continent of Antarctica has been shrouded in mystery. Its icy surface is believed to be nearly 40 million years old, and its high elevations, clear skies, and lack of heat-absorbing surfaces contribute to frigid temperatures, the average being about negative 71 degrees Fahrenheit in the interior. In addition to frigid temperatures, Antarctica remains an enigmatic puzzle, with many vast and hidden features that no man has ever stepped foot on, including active volcanoes and hidden lakes, hidden deep under the ice. Due to the rich landscape, Antarctica has often been an attraction for scientists and researchers, eager to discover what lies within its waters, within its ice, but at what cost? Many have gone missing from the 3 main US research stations there, and it's estimated that hundreds have died and remain buried deep within Antarctica's frozen facade. But the story of one missing scientist continues to baffle all those who visit the continent. And that's the story of scientist Carl Disch, who disappeared one gloomy, freezing cold evening and whose ghost has been repeatedly seen within the station by other scientists, begging them to investigate what really happened to him. We're exploring that story today. Welcome to the Conspiracy Files. Before we get into today's video, please, if you are watching right now, leave me a like and a comment. Let me know what you think of this story. The likes and the comments help boost these videos and help put them into the algorithm. I appreciate every single person that reaches out every week. I get so many messages and so many comments. You guys are absolutely amazing, but I won't take up any more time. Let's get into the story. So this is a very interesting story. Today we're talking about basically a missing persons case, but with some paranormal conspiratorial elements. Like, there's some really bizarre mind-bending stuff that we're going to discuss today. And I don't know if most of you guys know or not, but I have another channel, which is my main channel, the Paranormal Files, where I've been investigating claims of paranormal activity every single week for the last 10 years on YouTube. So these types of stories have always deeply interested me. And when I first read this story about Carl Disch, I was so intrigued. I knew that I had to turn this into an episode of the Conspiracy Files. But because we're heading to Antarctica today, I'm going to change the lights up. Damn it, that's not the right color. I hit green. Ah! White. Please do not mind the animal hair. Courtney and I have 2 dogs and a cat, so if you see any hairs on there, I'm sorry. I'm seeing them right now. I've never done white. Let's see how this goes. I guess white gives me the ultimate Antarctica vibe, you know, ice. But without further ado, let's get into the story. As always, you can check out the resources that we use to construct this story in the resources document in the description of the show. And thank you to Rebecca for helping to bring this story to light. I want to give another shout out to all the amazing women who work behind the scenes on this show. Every writer/researcher that I have hired to work on the show is a woman. So without the contributions of this amazing group of women, we would not be here. So just another thank you to them. Now, before his disappearance, not much was known about Carl Robert Disch. Born in Monroe, Wisconsin to a German-American family, Carl Disch studied the upper atmosphere, including how it interacted with the magnetosphere and thermosphere, and became an ionospheric physicist for the National Bureau of Standards. In November 1965, Carl Disch traveled to Antarctica with a team that was investigating radio noises to work on his studies at Byrd Station, one of the substations on Antarctica's surface in the Central Radio Propagation Laboratory. On the morning of May 8th at 9:15 a.m., Disch left the radio noise building and set off with a purposeful tread towards the main complex, a journey he had taken many times before. But on that fateful day, he never arrived. Disch ended up over 7,000 feet over from the main station complex, just over a mile, according to this investigator on YouTube who explains Carl's location.
This is a 7,000 foot approximately radius circle around the location he was headed towards. He would have been technically, let's say, right here. Now this is 7,000 feet, that's over a mile, 2-point-something kilometers, and he was supposed to follow a line doing this way. Now you might have noticed this picture I picked, which is from 2008 or something like that, from Google Earth, shows a line going this way. It's really pervasive. In fact, when you look at this sort of thing, you find out that the snow always seems to blow a certain way during certain times of the year. He was, let's say here, he would have been blown off track this way. And if he kept getting lost, he would have kept wandering. And if you're not aware of it, the standard that's used now is everybody carries 2 or more radios with backup batteries, so if they get lost, it also does something important. It can be a radio range and direction finder so that they can be retrieved, because this happens all the damn time. These days, they're just used to the thing being able to happen, so they do a couple of things. Number one, a station like this will have a fueled up vehicle that can travel 5 times the distance a person can walk in 12 hours, because people will walk in circles, number one. Number two, they carry a pinger on them or a radio. Next one is lately, they carry an auto-triggered one where if it gets beyond a certain distance, it immediately calls for help, and they just go and retrieve you, and to hell with whatever you're trying to do, they throw you bodily onto the vehicle and drive you back. The idea is to make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen anymore. Initially, they went up looking for him. I do believe it was north they went, and they found at the little station, which you can't see here, there's no sign of it anymore, at least not on any maps I can see here. They went north towards him and found his footprints heading generally south and then drifting with or against the wind. One of the problems is you have to realize that if the wind's going 50 miles an hour, you're going to tend to lean into it or go with it. If you go with it, you can go a longer distance, but you will not be going in the direction you want to go. And if you're not aware of it, at the South Pole, a compass isn't going to do you any damn good. This is before GPS and all of the other methods. So what they did is they had a rope or cord set that's over a mile long.
By 10 o'clock a.m., the team at the base organized a vehicle search party and went looking for Disch, assuming he had gotten lost. And at 11:30, his trail was picked up leading to the southwest corner of the skiway, about 4 miles away. The search party returned to the base to refuel, and then spent the next 3 hours trying to pick up the trail again. At 7 p.m., the search party went to investigate the area of the supply line, the emergency Jamesway, and dump, but the trail was gone. The party then formed a human chain to methodically search the snow-covered runway all the way from the dump area to the end of the skiway, but the conditions were extremely rugged and harsh. The wind speeds reached nearly 30 miles per hour that day, and the temperature was 44 degrees below zero, which threatened the safety of the searchers and covered the trail with drift. On May 9th, the search party covered a 1 mile wide by 9 mile long area running south of the skiway. They found occasional tracks and followed them to about 4 miles south of the station, where they then disappeared. There was no noticeable shortening of stride in these tracks, which they found to be peculiar. May 10th, the next day, an 8-man search party equipped with 2 vehicles, a Jamesway, and sufficient fuel and provisions to last a week left the station at around 7:40 a.m. They searched about 12 miles south to the station, marking the trail with flags, but again, no tracks were found. On May 12th, they searched the northeast and southeast sectors of Old Byrd Station. The visibility was good, but limited their range of vision. But the next 2 days' visibility was so poor due to blowing snow and incoming fog that no search was possible at all. Now, throughout the week, the team took measures to make the station more visible, including by firing flares into the sky and illuminating extra floodlights every 30 minutes. At one point, though, the temperatures in the area dropped to as low as negative 79 degrees Fahrenheit while Carl Disch was missing, and on May 14th, the search was called off. 35 square miles surrounding the Byrd Station had been searched, but no trace of Carl Byrd had been found. Not a shoe, not a piece of clothing, no tracks, nothing. He had just vanished. He was then presumed dead, and his body was never recovered. Back in Monroe, Wisconsin, where Disch was born and raised, they held memorial services for him, and he had only been 26 years old at the time of his death. An article from the Washoe Daily Herald in 1965 claimed that Carl Disch had told his parents he expected to be home by Christmas. Disch's supposed death was the only fatality suffered by CRPL in its Antarctic research, which supported increased understanding of the troposphere and ionosphere. So what happened? You have here essentially a scientist, a 26-year-old scientist who's been on base at this station, Byrd Station, for months, running the same tests, walking the same routes, doing the exact same things. It isn't a very big area, so really, if you're there, I'm assuming, there's however many buildings, a very limited amount of buildings. It's not this huge complex where it's easy to get lost, really. Everybody who's there at the Byrd Station knows where they're at all times. And Carl Disch had made the exact walk that he went missing from many times in the past. So he knew the exact direction he needed to walk. He knew exactly where he was headed, but somehow he vanished. And like I said, it's always very, very bizarre when you have footsteps that just end, a trail that just goes cold, no signs of a person ever seen or found. So what could have possibly happened? Well, there are obviously many theories as to what happened to Carl Disch. Let's talk about each of these theories in depth before we move on to some of the more strange facets of this case. Well, there's the weather. Many people wonder how Disch could have gone missing, as he was extremely experienced in his line of work and knew the Byrd Station like the back of his hand. However, temperatures as low as 79 degrees Fahrenheit at one point could have distracted him or set him off course. Now, if Disch was actually stranded outside, frostbite would have set in on his body rather quickly. It could have set in almost immediately, but it would have set in by 10 minutes, as frostbite normally occurs in about 30 minutes at the degrees of 5 Fahrenheit with a 35-mile-per-hour wind speed. So obviously some people believe he may have gotten distracted, he may have gotten lost, and he suffered frostbite. He basically froze to death. But that doesn't quite exactly make sense to me. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Now, this isn't quite weather related, but another theory was that the Byrd Station, where Carl Disch was stationed, could have been some sort of world energy grid point, or near a wormhole or portal in time. People who believe in this theory think that Carl Disch literally slipped through a portal into another dimension, and this would equate to something similar to the Bermuda Triangle, essentially, just making Antarctica an area where weird things happen, and there are these interdimensional gateways and portals. There's a lot to get into there. Other people believe that Carl Disch could have fallen into a crevasse, into ice somewhere, and that no one ever saw him leave and no one ever saw him fall, so no one ever was able to find where he ended up. The tracks that were found of Disch's indicated that he did not contact the hand line, which started at the ladder of the radio noise building but headed in a direction directly downwind. Now, an article by Anch Srivastava in 2023 stated that, quote, predator attacks were ruled out immediately. Polar bears are not found in Antarctica, as in principle with any four-legged predators, and coastal penguins are only threatened by skuas, killer whales, and sea lions, end quote. And finally, a Reddit user online suggested that Carl Disch may have fell through a seal hole and claimed that the blowing wind and freezing temperatures would have frozen over the hole pretty quickly and may have just sealed Carl Disch down there forever. On the surface, the tracks would have looked like they had just stopped, and under the ice, Carl Disch obviously would have had no hope of survival without proper diving gear. Now, other people, though, believe that Carl Disch may have intentionally left the station, and could have, in theory, wanted to end his own existence. The investigation at the station, you see, involved interviewing colleagues and a review of any audio or video recordings, and personnel also looked into Carl Disch's background and personal life to determine if there was any relevant information regarding his disappearance, if there was any relevant information that could help them solve his disappearance case, such as a history of mental illness or other information. One theory suggests that Disch may have had a mental breakdown, stationed isolated down at Byrd Station amidst the ice, where loneliness peaked and people's mental health typically takes a downward turn. Some people believe that this mental breakdown caused Carl Disch to, and they even claim that before he may have carried this out, he potentially destroyed some of his traces that he may have left at Byrd Station. Many also believe that he may have wandered off into the wilderness in a state of confusion or disorientation, based on the potentially erratic behavior that he displayed leading up to his disappearance, as documented by this clip from a Cosmos Lab documentary.
A series of events unfolded that eventually led to his mysterious disappearance. Disch, a researcher hailed for his expertise and competence, started displaying unusual behavior marked by erratic and unpredictable actions. His concerned peers at the time attempted to establish contact with him in a bid to assist, only to be met with silence on his end. The transformation of Disch from a reliable professional to a troubled individual at Byrd Station stirred deep apprehension among those who worked alongside him, prompting them to seek ways to support him despite his reluctance to engage. Over the ensuing days, Disch's conduct took a bizarre turn, escalating in peculiarity. His presence at the station was marked by aimless strolls, accompanied by incoherent muttering and erratic actions that raised concerns among his co-workers. Despite multiple attempts by his peers to address the situation, Disch remained obstinate. disregarding logical appeals and persisting in his unpredictable demeanor after a series of unfolding.
Dave Riley of Radiocom.net mentioned on his website that, quote, on August 18th, the Byrd Station husky, Sostrugus, or Gus for short, mysteriously disappeared and was never seen again. Some thought they saw lights and heard a vehicle in the distance, encouraging Gus to come that way, and later suggested Disch had lured him with food, end quote. Similar to the theory in Accident, it's possible that Disch intentionally left the hard line into safety and ventured off from Byrd Station based on his footprints that were headed in that direction. According to William Spindler, a project engineer who worked on the South Pole in Antarctica as early as the 70s, he recalled some interesting tidbits while interviewed on southpolestation.com, a website entirely dedicated to the science and research that is currently being done and studied on the South Pole. On Carl Disch's information page, William Spindler said the following, quote, one interesting anecdote must be added here, told to me by a good pole friend. Long before he ever set foot on the ice, he had a summer job working as a telescope operator at Kitt Peak National Observatory. One of his co-workers who also worked nights was Frank Riesley, a really nice guy, but one of the most boring people my friend had ever met. And keep in mind that things can get mighty boring at an astronomical observatory on nights when it is cloudy. After my friend had been there for a few months, another operator told him that Frank had spent some time in Antarctica years before and that he'd literally bored a coworker to death. The story was that the guy, Carl, got so tired of Frank's monotone that he just gave up and walked out onto the plateau, never to be seen again. Frank never mentioned the incident or the ice at all to my friend, end quote. Spindler also went on to say on his website, quote, another anecdote told to the same friend by the late Stanford VLF researcher John Katsifrakis, whom I also knew. John said that supposedly the incident that triggered his disappearance was a card game during winter. Disch accused someone of not treating him correctly or even cheating, threw his cards down, and announced that he was going to visit his friends at Pole. No one thought twice about his tantrum because he had done similar things before, but that was the last anyone saw of him, end quote. Some people believe that Carl Disch may have discovered something unexpected or groundbreaking during his work and that he left the station to explore it alone. And finally, a reader on Reddit also suggested at one point that because Carl Disch's trail headed off to the skiway, he could have had a plane waiting for him, as that area holds the airport where supplies come in, and part of his trail was gone due to wind and snow. Author David Hatcher Childress suggested this as well, and stated in his work that Carl Disch had negotiated a planned meeting in which a craft was sent from another nearby base to come get him. But then there are the more bizarre theories. So these are more practical theories. Maybe Carl Disch got lost and disoriented, so he walked in the wrong direction. Maybe he fell into a hole that was quickly iced over and no one was able to find him. Maybe he had an argument or something snapped and he decided he didn't want to be alive anymore, so he headed out into the snow with the intention of disappearing. But other people believe that the explanation as to what happened to Carl was much stranger. One theory is that Carl Disch was abducted by aliens, which was thought for two main reasons. First, his footprints just stopped in the snow, and they did not continue on the trail, even though the search party continued looking for him in every direction and continued looking for any sign that he had traveled anywhere else. Anytime you have footprints that just stop, something weird's going on there. I mean, you physically can't have footprints that just stop. Your body has to go somewhere, and it makes no sense to me that the footprints in the snow would be visible and then would suddenly cease. A 2023 article even claimed that the searchers looked around the area where his footprints stopped for Carl Disch's body and never found anything. Not even evidence that anyone had attacked him and dragged the body away, an animal attack, nothing. There was literally no further evidence. Like, his trail just ended. There was no piece of clothing found. There was absolutely nothing. Secondly, it was reported that in the days before and after the incident where Carl Disch went missing, there were a number of recorded sightings of strange lights around the area of the Byrd Station. While it seems unlikely to many that Disch may have been abducted by aliens, it could be possible that Disch himself saw the lights in the sky and walked towards them to investigate them further. In his book, author David Childress suggested that if Disch was taken aboard a UFO, he may have been taken to Argentina and one of the secret German bases or ranches located there in the 1960s. And you see, that's because Argentina was a UFO and submarine hotspot at the time. But some people believe in a more human explanation. Some people believe that Carl Disch may have been a Soviet spy. He was, after all, doing part of his work there during the Cold War, and it was no secret back then that various Antarctic research stations were managed at the same time by different rival superpowers, and that those stations in Antarctica often served as a cover for secret military activity. According to the 2023 article by Sravostava, Carl Disch was a Soviet scientific spy during the height of the Cold War between the US and USSR, and he claims that Disch was evacuated by Antarctica by secret Soviet agents. Those strange lights that were seen by other members of the staff at the Byrd Station, along with the sounds that they heard, were supposedly caused by secret Soviet technology. So, keep in mind, we have no idea what happened to Carl Disch. He just vanished. But that wasn't the end of Carl Disch. In fact, 6 years later, 6 years after Carl Disch vanished into the wild Antarctic wilderness, another research station in Antarctica, run by the AA2 Weather Circuit, claimed to have received messages directly from Carl Disch or his ghost at the McMurdo Message Center. One week, the message from Disch might have come via the Russian station, and the next week, it could have come from the French, or it may have been from the Argentine station up in the Antarctic Peninsula. The headings of these messages, though, had all the same relay instructions: CQ, CQ, DE, NBN, NBN, QSP, NGD, NGD. This message translates to, any station, this is Brockton Station, pass this message to McMurdo Station. And the messages that were received from a phantom source that was never identified and given to the McMurdo Station read as follows: I am Carl Disch. To the world, I am dead. They believe that my body is but a pinpoint frozen hard to the surface of this white continent. I say to you, I, Carl Disch, live. Do not for one moment think that it was a mistake. Everything was planned. They pushed me, tormented me, and bored me with their shallow lives. I left them behind, disowning the race called humans. On a bleak Saturday night 6 years ago, I walked out the door of Longwire Station. I never returned. They searched for me, as I knew they would, following my straight, deliberate steps for several miles. They never found me, and not one of them realized they had been tricked. They gave up, and I, Carl Disch, was free of them. I, Carl Disch, the most alone man in the world. It has not been an easy task to sustain myself for 6 years. At times, the endless singing of the winds almost drives me mad. I begin to long for human companionship. As quickly as the longing begins, it vanishes, however, for I have been tormented, scorned, and betrayed by my fellow humans, even those who I tried to love. Yes, it seems foolhardy to willingly subject myself to such hardship and loneliness when men such as Byrd and Shackleton so narrowly escaped the effects. But my story makes theirs pale in comparison. I am a genius. In the early recollections of my childhood, I was aware that I was exceptional. They sensed it too, and because of it, they were afraid of me. I therefore walked away from their insecurities, paranoia, and petty jealousies. Born of ordinary folks, I lived a normal life, but only to my first birthday. Now, 25 years later, I've regained the tranquility of that first year of my life here in my shack, which shifts slowly with the rest of this continent. Soon after my first birthday, my folks were killed in a vicious Nebraska tornado, and I landed in an adoption home, nameless and without a worldly possession. There in the orphanage, I closely watched the others. Even then, as I saw them drool and shake their senseless rattles, I knew I was above them. I was not to be one of them. Perhaps even then they were plotting against me, and maybe even then Carl Disch was dreaming of getting away from these people. The pink bird which flew its painted way across the headboard of my crib, the headboard that tasted vaguely of a substance I would later identify as enamel when I rose up to lick it, as all smart one-year-old children tend to do, was to be a sign for the future and my salvation. Years later, Byrd Station was all there was to be seen as I snuck my last look at humanity as I glanced back over my shoulder. When I was 15 months old, an elderly couple named Disch came, saw, and adopted me. We'll call him Carl. Carl Disch, she said with great enthusiasm. The agony had begun. What a crazy supervillain sort of sounding message. And I get such creepy, eerie vibes from that message. It's literally, it sounds like, I don't know, it sounds like some villain from a movie, you know, saying I transcended humanism. I transcended the human experiment. I am it's like he's like a god, you know, like a megalomaniac. Like this guy has somehow escaped the mortal bounds of our bodies and our flesh and has become this like energetic, godlike being. It's creepy. It's a really creepy message. Later messages that were received by the station even accounted for the fact that Carl Disch's dog went missing shortly after he did. And the person who sent the messages claimed that he had seduced Carl's dog away using tinned oysters soaked in barbecue sauce. It was never really established that the team had resumed searching for Carl at the return of spring. And those messages that were received have never truly been explained. They don't know the source point. They don't know where they were being broadcast from. Nobody knows who typed the messages, who sent the messages out, but they are really, really bizarre. I understand, there's a potential that it could be a prank or some like that, but the actual message itself is so strange. It's not like some sort of morbid prank or joke. It's actually, it seems to be seething with the sort of deep hatred or anger or narcissism. I mean, it's really bizarre. But now that we've heard the many theories that claim to explain why Carl Disch disappeared or how he disappeared in Antarctica, we can point out several factors that either support or deny said theories. In Nicholas Johnson's book, Big Dead Place, he states that, quote, a report by Lawrence A. Palinkas on the ice, individual and group adaptation in Antarctica says that Antarctica has long been viewed as having enormous potential as a natural laboratory for the social and behavioral sciences. This predominantly involves the discovery and analysis of winter over syndrome, a condition that was primarily found in inhabitants of the Arctic and other polar bases. Winter over syndrome lasts about 7 to 8 months, primarily through the months of winter, which for Antarctica is February through October, and includes a series of behavioral and medical disturbances, including irritability, depression, insomnia, absent-mindedness, aggressive behavior, and irritable bowel syndrome. It also included diminished cognitive performance, including difficulty in concentration and memory, and the occurrence of mild hypnotic states known as long eye or the Antarctica stare. There are several factors estimated to contribute to winter over syndrome, including little to no sunlight, no physical contact with other continents or stations with no airplanes, ships or mail, low air pressure, oxygen-poor atmosphere, the driest desert climate on Earth, and a mean temperature of negative 51 degrees Celsius or negative 60 degrees Fahrenheit. These are all believed to cause immobility, monotony, harsh physical environments, deprivation, and general isolation, and therefore contributed to increased anxiety and depression among the residents of Antarctic stations. The most important psychological stresses appear to be the problems of individual adjustment to the group, the relative monotony of the environment, and the absence of certain accustomed sources of emotional satisfaction. In addition to isolation from the outside world, there is confinement or a lack of isolation within the research stations themselves. During fieldwork conducted at the McMurdo and South Pole stations in 1988 and 1989, informants complained that the lack of privacy and constant gossip within the community had a negative influence on social relationships, especially between men and women. As a result, 60% of one's leisure time is spent alone in a dorm room, whereas others are forced to work and live in confined spaces due to the nature of their work, end quote. Now, Johnson's book also goes on to state that another study indicated that, quote, approximately 5% of winter over personnel experience symptoms that fulfill DSM-5 criteria for a psychiatric disorder and are severe enough to warrant intervention. 5% of 1,000 people during the winter is nearly 50 people, which is a lot considering the population size, end quote. Additionally, Johnson mentions that in his time there, he had never once heard anyone complain about the weather or the environment. People always left because of what he said was, quote, the end quote. Little was known or said about Carl Disch, so it's difficult to determine his mental status apart from the couple of minor interactions that supposedly happened during his stay. But I think it's very possible that based on what information was said about his behavior before he disappeared and conducted his research, that Disch could have very well intentionally left with the intent to self-unalive due to symptoms he was experiencing at the height of winter in May. In a video titled The Strange Disappearance of Carl Robert Disch, published in 2015, an investigator also noted something interesting in this clip.
One of the searchers noted that there was no noticeable shortening of stride in these tracks, as if Disch was walking towards something with a purpose and not stumbling around blindly. If he had gotten lost, why had he not merely followed his tracks back? Obviously, they were visible enough that the searchers were able to track him for up to 4 miles. Granted, while this is merely speculation, one has to wonder what would cause Disch to disregard his own safety, wander away from his predetermined destination, and out into no man's land. It simply makes no sense.
An article in the Indianapolis Star in 1966 confirmed that there had been rumors of lights and sounds in the sky around the time of Disch's disappearance, saying, quote, "It's a good Antarctic story," said Ron Sefton, the scientific leader at Byrd Station. "I've heard a number of versions myself, embellished with weird stories about the possibilities of the scientist and the dog being snatched by UFOs, or the possibility of their heading for a hidden lush valley where folklore says the skuas, birds. If Disch had fallen and was lying on the snow, the husky would have seen him long before the searchers would. Similarly, if he had fallen and was covered by drifting snow, the dog would have sighted the mound and rushed to investigate it. That's the way huskies are," end quote. On the contrary, though, an article by Rob Tomlin published in December 2024 questioned the research that came from Admiral Richard E. Byrd's Antarctic expeditions. Yes, the same Byrd whom the station was named after. The article discusses how Operation Highjump was one of the largest Antarctic missions ever conducted by Byrd, involving thousands of personnel, dozens of ships, and advanced aircrafts, and how it could have had more secretive goals, such as to investigate anomalous, potentially extraterrestrial activity, such as advanced alien technology. Additionally, Byrd supposedly kept a secret diary in which he recounted encountering strange flying crafts and an advanced civilization during a flight over Antarctica. Finally, the article discusses how numerous accounts from explorers and researchers have described seeing strange lights in Antarctica's skies. These sightings, often dismissed as nothing more than atmospheric phenomena, such as the aurora borealis, bear striking similarities to UFO reports from around the world. While the accounts from Admiral Boyd prove interesting, there isn't enough evidence to conclude that Carl Disch was taken by a UFO, and it seems that an atmospheric phenomenon is a more probable cause, but you can decide for yourself. I definitely think that there are UFOs and aliens that frequent Antarctica, but we can make a whole different video about all of that. Now, David Paulides, a trained investigator and the guy who coined the term missing 411, thought the disappearance was overall suspicious. And Paulides himself has actually stated that he believes that Disch's disappearance fits the requirements to be considered a missing 411 case. If you don't know what missing 411 is, it's so many thousands of people that have just vanished into thin air. Very similar stories like this where their footsteps just end or they completely just, it's like they go into a portal to another realm. He's written so many books, there are movies about missing 411. It's really, really interesting. Now, Paulides actually stated that Disch having German heritage was a factor in his disappearance. There were a lot of people in his disappearance. The missing 411 people frequently have German heritage, but this was discredited by the fact that people of German ancestry are the largest group of people of European descent in general. So this pattern may have been coincidence. Additionally, while the USSR did have many research stations also located on Antarctica, it appears that the nearest Soviet station to Byrd Station was nearly 2,248 kilometers or 1,400 miles away. If the USSR really wanted to abduct Carl Disch for their own purposes, they certainly would have had quite the expenditure and quite the journey to make this happen. One Reddit user on a thread discussed the possibility that Carl Disch could have been walking purposefully with intent and pointed out that he didn't seem to be aimlessly wandering, and they posited that he may have been picked up by a snowmobile or a sled, or possibly could have been given a survival cache with food and extra clothing and thermal blankets. The user suggested that maybe it was a defection to the USSR, or that Carl Disch himself was a spy who realized that he had been found out and arranged for a quick extraction, as both the US and USSR were obviously using their stations in Antarctica for various espionage purposes at that time. A CIA document released in 2010 also noted that the USSR did do research in ionospheric physics. Now, whether this was exclusively with their own physicists or with Carl Disch on the team, we may never know. Keep in mind that ionospheric research and ionospheric physics was one of Carl Disch's specialties, and that CIA document released in 2010 said the USSR was conducting experiments and research into those realms in Antarctica at that exact time. Now, Byrd Station, the station from which Disch vanished in 1965, was closed in early 2005 and was then left to be an abandoned base, according to the U.S. military. The 1965 bulletin of the U.S. Antarctic Project officer noted record lows for Byrd Station and underscored the dangers of that area with a story about Old Byrd Station, which had been replaced after it was buried by a snowdrift only 5 years after its completion. Additionally, it was reported that Old Byrd, established in 1965, only lasted about 4 years before it began to collapse under the snow. Construction of a second underground station in a nearby location began in 1960, and this station was then used until 1972. And this would have been the very station that Disch called home before he vanished. Additionally, this base was also home to the Operation Deep Freeze activities, which were established by the U.S. military and Coast Guard. Author David Childress of the book Antarctica and the Secret Space Program noted the following about Byrd Station, saying, quote, "While most research stations in Antarctica are placed along the coastal regions, Byrd Station is located far inland, but not near any mountains or any geographic features that might be of value to science." George Toney, the scientific leader at Byrd in 1957, speculated that the reason for the camp's inland location was that it was spang in the middle of a huge unclaimed wedge of Antarctica where the US might well launch a claim later on if it came to that. End quote. No one really knows why Byrd Station was out there in the vast wasteland of Antarctica in the first place, except for maybe the military to try lay claim to a huge area of ice, away from any other geological features. In a newspaper article from the Washoe Daily Herald, published in 1965, Carl Disch's parents claimed that Disch was a smart boy, and had claimed shortly before his disappearance that the weather was really bad. There was also a very real threat of falling into crevasses. Researchers, climbers, and general purpose adventurers take frequent precautions against falling into one of these chasms, carefully probing ahead on their route, roping up, and even rigging braces that could catch them should they fall into a hidden crevasse. The creation in 2006 of the McMurdo South Pole Highway, aka South Pole Traverse, an ice road linking McMurdo Station with the Amundsen Scott Station, involved filling in multiple crevasses, affording safe passage for vehicles and footbound travelers through such perilous terrain as the Leverett Glacier in the Transantarctic Mountains. The information that we had about crevasses was obviously not as robust in the 1960s, when research into these things had really just begun, so it's not exactly unlikely that Carl Disch may have fallen into one. As we mentioned, skin exposure in those conditions would have caused frostbite in as little as 10 minutes, despite Carl Disch's clothing being so thick and supposedly ready to withstand those temperatures. Even though he was wearing this thick clothing and was, prepared for these temperatures, though, extended times in the cold likely would have made his clothing less effective. Based on this information, it is possible that Disch did just wander off from the station in extreme conditions and left out to his death amongst the negative wind chill and freezing temperatures. The messages that McMurdo Station received from Carl Disch, those phantom ghost signals, supposedly had come from many different foreign stations across the continent. When they questioned the foreign station that had relayed the message to them about the originating call sign, though, they always confirmed that it was NBN. And this is very strange because Brockton, NBN, that station where these messages were originally being broadcast from, was a summer-only weather station and nothing more really than a fuel pit. There additionally is not much information online about the Brockton Station other than the fact that it was primarily used for meteorology purposes and was vacant much of the year. Brockton Station also wasn't established until October of 1965, which would have put Disch's messages coming in around 1971, 6 years later, and it was 300 miles southeast of the McMurdo Station near the Center Ross ice shelf. There isn't a lot of other information known about these messages. Many claim obviously it was a hoax, and while in combination with the other theories it may seem possible, but it also seems a little unlikely. You can't explain it though. The messages are real. These are real messages that were received by these different stations. So these stations were getting the messages and then sending them to the McMurdo Station where they were being directed. And when they tried to track them down, like I said, they saw that these messages were coming from this Brockton Station, which it's bizarre. It's vacant a lot of the year. It's kind of a smaller, really off the grid base. And obviously no one there claimed that they were sending these messages. It's just a really weird, eerie chapter in the saga that has never been officially explained by anyone. You can say all day, say, oh, it's just a hoax, but you don't know that it was a hoax. That's the whole thing. It's so bizarre because there's no evidence. No one's ever came forward and, claimed, oh, hey, I was the guy who sent those messages. Good prank, haha. That's never happened. They're just officially unexplained. And like I said earlier, the verbiage in those messages is really narcissistic sounding and gives me just this creepy vibe of like an egomaniac narcissistic who somehow cracked some spiritual code and became like a godlike figure of the ice. I know that sounds insane, but that's just the feeling I get. But could Disch have really become some sort of a godlike spirit, a ghost of the ice, an Antarctic haunting? Well, for the 3 years following Carl Disch's disappearance, there were rumors that spread amongst the crew at the station that he disappeared from that a ghost-like man and dog had been seen in unlikely places all across the Antarctic continent. There was even talk, obviously, that this was the spirit of Carl Disch, but no one knew for certain. Then, for the next 3 years, the rumors were that this ghost-like man, who was seen multiple times by people on expeditions out into the ice. For example, one of the stories is people that are out collecting data and they saw a man and a dog walking through the snow off in the distance, and they tried to make contact, they tried to chase him down, never found anybody, never found footprints, anything like that. This was just a visual anomaly. And then for the next 3 years after those sightings really started, when people all around Antarctica were seeing this man and this dog off in the snow, off in the distance, walking amongst the snowdrifts and blizzards, the rumors were that the ghost-like man was now being seen traveling alone without the dog, but could sometimes be heard calling in the wind for his companion. Gus, Gus, Gus. On radiocom.net, there were records of 3 separate emails from the year 2001 sent into the website of others who had been stationed at the base who reportedly saw Carl's ghost inside the buildings. Now, this is interesting. So, one of these emails that's published on the website came from a user named Shugart1 on Friday, June 22nd, 2001 at 10:25 p.m. The email read, "My first summer, October 1978 to February 1979, on the ice I worked part-time as manager of the Erebus Club. One day in early December, I spent the after-work hours between the Erebus and CPO clubs. The time came to close the club, tally the daily sales, and secure the building for the night. I had counted the money, filled out the proper paperwork, and was putting the money in the safe. The old Erebus Club had a large safe in the storeroom behind the bar that's purpose was truly overkill. Because of the evening's libations, I had to sit on the floor so my eyes could focus on the dial and my hands steady enough to work the combination. While I was trying to get the safe open, I felt the presence of someone standing behind me. I looked over my left shoulder and saw an old man standing at the end of the bar. He was dressed in old gray cold weather gear and had a white beard and hair. I turned back to the safe, spun the dial, and got up. The guy had gone from the bar. I stepped out into the main room of the club, and he was nowhere in sight. There's no way someone could have gotten out of the club that fast, and I'm certain today as I was then, I had seen a man standing at the end of the bar. I made a thorough check of the club and found no one inside. I locked the club, scampered over to the CPO club, where some after-hours picking and grinning was going on. I told CMC Al King what had happened and immediately became the guy who saw the ghost in the Erebus. Lieutenant Drain, the NSFA personnel officer, heard the story and immediately came asking about it. Lieutenant Drain was into that satanic crap and had all kinds of a spin put on my story in no time. He was so excited I thought he was going to piss himself. After I found the OAEs and told the story in response to someone mentioning Drain, and he being a PNSN with VX6 in his early career, Billy Ace told me I had seen Carl Disch. Whomever I saw that night sure sobered me up. I took a little kidding about the event, but more honest and sincere inquiries were made of it than anything. So, that's one experience of someone at the same base seeing a older man's figure with a beard and hair. Some people posit it could have been Disch. He could have aged. The snow and the cold could have aged him rapidly. I don't know. There's another email, though, from a user named NATSCO to UPIZAUF, sent on 6/21/2001 at 9:43 p.m. This email says, I saw Carl when I was closing up the club one night just before all of the summer non-support pukes left. I was the only one in the club. I was taking the money out of the register, and I sensed that someone was in the club. I turned around to look, and I saw a man and a dog. Thought it was Dune with him. Dune ran against me for mayor. I won 68-65 votes. There were only 72 in the WO party that year. That's another story. I put the money back in the register, turned around again, and they were gone. Really spooky. It scared the shit out of me, but I know I saw someone. with that email, you have another person working at one of these clubs, these kind of mutual hangout areas where the researchers and scientists can, eat and drink. And this is the second time someone has seen a ghost in that area, or a phantom disappearing figure of a man. This time, though, interestingly, it's a man and a dog that are seen by somebody. And these are stories coming in from scientists and researchers who were stationed down in Antarctica. So these aren't just people that would typically subscribe to the paranormal and the concept of the paranormal. These are people that are saying, essentially, I don't know what I saw, but I definitely saw this. And then there's a third email that's pretty interesting, sent from someone named Charlie on Friday, June 22nd, 2001 at 8:41 a.m. The email read, Billy, Ken Falone, and I were the loadmasters on the first flight in to open up Byrd Station after that winter. We made a long, low approach with a crewman at every window looking for any sign of Disch or his trail, but we saw nothing. The winter over guys said he was acting really strange for weeks before he walked out. Charlie. Now, the possible sightings of Carl Disch's ghost by others at the station would also seem to suggest that Disch had been long dead. So with that email, you don't have a ghost story, but you have just once again some confirmation from somebody who was allegedly there that Disch had been acting really strange before he vanished. And obviously, if people are seeing Carl Disch's spirit or his ghost, that would point to the fact that he was long dead at that time. If you really believe in energy and the possibility that a spirit can return, it's almost like he was coming back to the station, maybe to remind people that he was out there still. Obviously, you'd be unhappy, unsettled if he accidentally died and his body was trapped out there. I don't know how all of that works, but it's just so strange. So you have a guy who walks out into the snow, completely no explanation whatsoever. His steps, his trail, his footsteps just end, and he seemingly vanishes into thin air. 6 years later, you have phantom radio messages being broadcast by, supposedly, the guy who disappeared, claiming that he had transcended humanity, and he was always smarter and more advanced than everybody, and that everyone was foolish to think he had disappeared. He had just evolved into something bigger and badder. Then you have multiple people at the base seeing the spirit of a man, and at one point, the spirit of a man and his dog on the base itself. And you also have people who were conducting research and going out across the continent of Antarctica, seeing this man and dog, and then just the man, the spirits of them walking amongst the snow, or the figures of them. So, I don't know. I feel like obviously you're going to be going crazy a little bit regardless if you're stationed in Antarctica amidst the cold and the unforgiving harshness and just the pure white snow and the landscape and everything. But it's such a weird story. It's really, really weird. And there's no proper explanation. No trace of him has ever been found. No clothing, no shoes, no glove, no additional footprints. He just vanished. Then you have the lights in the sky too that were seen at the same time before and after his disappearance. You have allegations that he was a Soviet spy. I mean, it's all just so strange. In 1965, shortly after Carl's disappearance, the Institute for Telecommunication Sciences wrote in its quarterly news announcement that they were no longer maintaining Antarctic research stations, but the knowledge gained from these experiments led to a better understanding of radio propagation and interference in the atmosphere that still guides current research. In the scientific community, Carl Disch's disappearance raised questions about the dangers of conducting research in extreme environments such as Antarctica. It has also sparked discussions about the importance of mental health support for researchers working in these remote locations. The disappearance has also led to a renewed focus on safety protocols and procedures for researchers working in remote and challenging environments. But nearly 60 years ago, access to research and other information and technologies was not widely available as it is now. Working conditions in remote locations have likely changed to some extent, and while they're still remote, access to technology, better working and living conditions, and communication has improved. According to Carl Disch's family, he was never found, but they still remain hopeful that one day he will be located. As for what happened to Carl Disch, though, I think it's easy to assume the consequences of leaving the lifeline, leaving the base in a negative 40-degree blizzard, and what that could do to a human body, but only time and research will tell the stories that the South Pole holds, buried deep beneath the frozen ice. Now, This was a bit of a departure from our normal content here, but there are so many stories like this that I would love to cover of weird paranormal alien encounters and just really weird. And I thought this story is so intriguing. Him disappearing is intriguing enough. That's so bizarre that your footsteps would just end and there's no trace of you ever found. Also, the no explanation as to why he was out there, but then the lights in the sky before and after he goes missing, the reports of his strange behavior, the ghost sightings years later, the bizarre phantom radio messages from the missing man that have like a vindictive, almost really intensely negative, godlike tone to them. Yeah, so let me know if you thought this was interesting and if you'd like to hear another story like this, because I have a whole laundry list of stories that I'd like to do with these same sorts of vibes. But anyways, y'all, thank you so much for listening today. Thank you for joining me on the Conspiracy Files. If you've liked today's video, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave me a like and a comment. If you're listening to the show, be sure to leave me a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're listening to the show. We will be back next Wednesday with another video. Thank you guys for taking this deep dive with me. And as always, keep that tinfoil hat on. Always question everything. Stay suspicious. And I'll see you next week.